24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Coming up on Arirang News. The South Korea government begins sending notifications ahead of taking administrative action, possibly the suspension of licenses to doctors who have not returned to their duties. Meanwhile, medical schools have asked for a higher number of admissions than the government-planned increase of 2,000. Seoul and Washington named their chief negotiators to start a fresh round of talks on splitting the bill for the U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. We take a look at why the appointment comes unusually early for a pact that would take effect in 2026. South Korea's gross national income per capita rebounded to over $33,000 last year, thanks to a pickup in economic growth and a relatively stable currency against the greenback. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with South Korea proceeding with legal action against the doctors still on a mass walkout. After inspections at hospitals, the government began sending notifications to doctors who had not resumed work ahead of suspending their licenses. Meanwhile, medical schools have asked for a higher number of admissions than the government-planned increase of 2,000. Kim Bo-kyung leads us off. The government gave out warnings that license suspensions would be imminent for the trainee doctors who had not returned to work. The health ministry began on-site investigations at major hospitals on Monday to see how many doctors have defied the government's return to work orders. As of 8 p.m. Monday, more than 90% of resident doctors, some 8,900, were still absent from their posts nationwide. 50 major hospitals out of 100 have already been checked in person, with the remaining 50 inspected on Tuesday. Health officials have already secured evidence in relation to 7,000 trainee doctors and plan to notify them that the government will take steps to enforce disciplinary action.
As soon as the violations for not returning to work are confirmed, the government will start license suspension procedures. We are going to issue notices of such administrative measures starting Tuesday.
Doctors will be allowed to defend themselves through statements of opinion delivered over the next 2 weeks before their licenses are officially suspended. The health ministry is also mulling over whether to file a criminal complaint with the police against some junior doctors who led the massive walkout, but the exact details have not yet been decided. Meanwhile, as of Monday, a total of 40 medical schools have reportedly informed the Education Ministry of the exact size of their quota increases. They've asked for an increase of 3,401 students. 930 slots have been requested by 13 schools in Seoul and the surrounding areas, 2,471 elsewhere across the country. This number is much higher than the government-planned increase of 2,000 and what was detailed in the surveys the universities had submitted last year. The government said it would promptly allocate students to each school accordingly, saying that such a high figure shows regional med schools' strong will to strengthen regional and essential medical services. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News. Shifting gears, Seoul and Washington have named their chief negotiators to start a fresh round of talks on splitting the bill for the U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. Our Bae-eun-ji takes a look at why the appointment comes unusually early for a pact that would take effect in 2026.
South Korea has appointed a veteran diplomat as the chief negotiator for a new round of talks on defense cost sharing with the U.S. Lee Tae-woo, who previously served as the consul general in Sydney, will lead the country's delegation consisting of relevant authorities from the ministries of Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Finance. The team will hold talks with a U.S. delegation led by Linda Specht, a senior advisor and U.S. lead negotiator for security agreements at the State Department.
I feel the heavy weight on my shoulders, but I will do my best to ensure that a rational level of defense cost sharing is achieved to provide a stable stationing environment for the deployment of US forces Korea, an essential element of combined defense posture between South Korea and the US.
Since 1991, South Korea has been shouldering the cost needed for U.S. troops to be stationed in Korea, including labor, logistics, and construction costs. The two countries have regularly held talks on how to share these costs, and the upcoming talks will be the 12th. The most recent deal was signed in 2021 and will be effective until the end of next year. With almost 2 years left before it expires, it's unusual for the two countries to begin negotiations again. This is widely seen as a move aimed at reaching an agreement before the possible re-election of former U.S. President Donald Trump, who during his presidency had accused South Korea of free riding, demanding it pay as much as $5 billion a year. But the foreign ministry has denied the speculation, saying early preparation has nothing to do with the election in November.
There have been cases in the past where defense cost-sharing talks took a considerable amount of time. Considering these circumstances, a representative has been appointed to allow sufficient time before the next round of negotiations.
More than 28,000 American troops are currently stationed in South Korea as part of efforts to deter North Korea's nuclear threat and to strengthen combined readiness. Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea's gross national income per capita, which is the amount of money earned per person in the country, rebounded last year to above $33,000, mainly thanks to the relatively stable currency against the greenback. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday show that the country's gross national income per capita rose by 2.6% in 2023 compared to the year before, on the back of stabilizing exchange rates. South Korea's GNI per capita jumped to $33,745 last year after dipping below the 33,000 mark in 2022 due to a weak Korean won against the greenback. It first passed the $30,000 mark back in 2017 and peaked to some $35,000 in 2021 during the post-pandemic economic recovery, before plummeting again in 2022, falling below Taiwan's GNI per capita for the first time in 20 years. In 2023, however, South Korea's GNI per capita overtook Taiwan once again due to Taiwan's currency falling against the dollar.
Taiwan's nominal GNI increased by 3.9%, almost the same as Korea's. US dollar exchange rate rose against the local currency by 1.1% last year, but by 4.5% against the Taiwan dollar.
Meanwhile, gross domestic product, which doesn't include overseas earnings, increased by 1.4% on year. The data is unchanged from the central bank's earlier estimate in January and marks the slowest growth seen in 3 years. It's nearly half that of the 2.6% on-year growth recorded in 2022. The central bank mostly attributed the sluggish growth to weak private consumption, which rose by only 1.8% on-year. Small increases in government spending and exports also contributed to the stunted growth, rising by 1.3% and 3.1% on-year respectively. In the fourth quarter last year, South Korea's economy grew by 0.6% on quarter, posting quarterly growth for the fourth consecutive quarter. This is also in line with the BOK's previous estimate. Positive growth in the fourth quarter was mostly led by an increase in exports thanks to a recovery in the chip sector despite a drop in construction investment. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
President Yoon says investments in young people give some of the best bangs for the buck. His remarks came at a policy discussion to empower young people, where he has promised to expand the National Scholarship Program and tax breaks for childbirth incentives. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
The South Korean government is expanding its national scholarship program so that 1.5 million college students will be eligible, up from the current 1 million. That's more than half of slightly more than 2 million enrolled college students. The announcement came as President Yoon Suk-yeol held a policy discussion in the city of Gangwon in Gyeonggi-do Province on empowering young people.
먼저 청년들이 희망을 가질 수 있어야 나라의 미래도 열어갈 수 있습니다. 청년들이 걱정 없이 공부하고 일하며 꿈을 키우고 미래를 준비할 수 있도록 하겠습니다.
In addition, work-study programs will expand. By 2025, 200,000 students will be able to participate. And a new, quote, housing scholarship will provide students with up to 2,400,000 Korean won annually. That's about $1,800 US. The government will also open up the Youth Leap account to more people. The savings account is for 19 to 34-year-olds earning up to 60 million won or around $46,000, allowing savings of up to $38,000 after 5 years with an interest rate of 6%. The income limit will increase to include more people.
그야말로 재정 투자를 했을 때 투자 효과가 엄청나게 큰 겁니다. 그야말로 청년들에 대한 이런 약간의 투자는 그야말로 돈 되는 장사다 이 말입니다.
President Yoon also emphasized direct involvement of young people in shaping government policy, saying they're able to see the world fairly and just. Meanwhile, it wasn't just about the opportunities, but it was also about the struggles, including single mothers struggling to receive child support from their former husbands.
Especially if the introduction of the advance payment system is introduced, the state will pay child support up front and then ensures that it be collected from the non-custodial parent. I believe it's important to instill a sense of responsibility in non-custodial parents towards their children.
This was President Yoon's pledge during the campaign, and an official from the Ministry of Family answered that relevant ministries are shaping practical measures to make this possible by the second half of next year. Also at the discussion, the government announced that it will not be taxing the childbirth incentives being given by private companies. This is an ongoing effort by the private sector to tackle the current low birth rate. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's associate membership in Horizon Europe, the European Union's framework program for research and innovation, is imminent. That's according to Park Sang-wook, the president's first senior secretary for science and technology. He told reporters today that former negotiations are drawing to a close, and Minister of Science and ICT Lee Jong-ho will announce the new associate membership in Brussels later this month. This would facilitate collaborative research between South Korea and EU member states, especially in addressing global challenges. Meanwhile, the government is also set to increase its support of what it calls innovation-leading R&D projects using artificial intelligence, especially in the fields of biotechnology and semiconductors. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, has said that test runs of the lightwater reactor have been observed at North Korea's Yongbyon nuclear complex. In a statement on Tuesday, the IAEA's Director General said a discharge of warm water has been spotted coming from the lightwater reactor's cooling system, adding that it indicates test runs. The reactor has long been suspected as a facility for North Korea to increase its production of nuclear materials used to make warheads. He stressed that any operations at the Yongbyon nuclear complex would be a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The United Nations has appointed its new resident coordinator to North Korea, which Pyongyang has approved. The regime is opening its doors to the UN as well as Western diplomats, possibly to diversify its diplomatic contact channels. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil explains what could be behind Pyongyang's motivation.
After a long period of isolation due to the COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea is finally allowing the UN to send a resident coordinator back to Pyongyang. On Friday, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres appointed Joe Colombano of Italy as a resident coordinator to the DPRK. Pyongyang has already approved this, and Colombano, who is working remotely from UN offices in Bangkok, is expected to head to the north shortly. The decision to open its doors to the UN came alongside North Korea's recent attempts to welcome Western diplomats. Early last week, the Chinese embassy in Pyongyang announced that a German diplomat in charge of East Asia affairs visited the North. This was the first time for a Western diplomat to visit Pyongyang since the North closed its borders due to the pandemic. Such an isolationary measure saw most diplomats return to their home countries. North Korea's recent moves were noticed by the South Korean government. A senior official from the Unification Ministry told reporters on Tuesday that Seoul welcomes actions by the reclusive regime to open its doors to Western countries. Because until now, Pyongyang has been heightening exchanges with only a handful of countries, including Russia and China, isolating itself from the rest of the world. Professor Park Won-gon of Ewha Women's University says Pyongyang has clear intentions behind its recent moves.
And the international community considers North Korea is a rogue and pariah state. So that's why they are trying to open up and more actively engage with the world. And at the same time, this kind of activity means that it can a little bit undermine the South Korea, US, and Japan, the cooperation.
Professor Park added South Korea's recent establishment of diplomatic ties with Cuba may also have had some kind of impact on Pyongyang's actions to expand its diplomatic channels. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
China has set its 2024 economic growth target of around 5%, which analysts describe as ambitious, amid challenges facing its development, including sluggish property market and weak investor confidence. Jung Eun-ju has the details.
China has announced an ambitious 2024 economic growth target of around 5%, in line with analysts' expectations, while promising steps to transform the country's development model and defuse risks fueled by bankrupt property developers and structural imbalances. Chinese Premier Li Qiang delivered his government work report on Tuesday at the annual meeting of the National People's Congress, the country's annual parliamentary gathering. Li spoke of the challenges while citing the global economy and regional tensions as hurdles for China's recovery, as well as domestic issues such as low consumer demand and a challenging labor market. There was no timeline or concrete details for the structural changes China intends to implement. The 5% target is in line with last year's goal, which was notably restrained as China emerged from 3 years of strict zero-COVID measures, which impacted the economy. According to official statistics, China's GDP grew by 5.2% in 2023. But independent economists estimate that the actual growth rate to be lower. The International Monetary Fund projects that China's economy will grow by 4.6% this year. Li also flagged higher defense spending while hardening the rhetoric on Taiwan and dropping previous mentions of peaceful reunification. Budgetary plans included an increase in defense spending by 7.2% this year, similar to 2023. Li acknowledged the targets would not be easy and said that high-quality development remained the priority. Investors are closely watching this year's meetings, known as the two sessions, of the National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, for clues on how President Xi Jinping plans to tackle the slowing economy. A spokesperson for the NPC revealed on Monday that Li would not give a press conference at the end of this meeting in a break with precedent. Jung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
France has set in stone women's right to an abortion in its constitution, becoming the first country to do so. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The French Parliament on Monday approved a constitutional amendment that stipulates women's freedom to have an abortion, making France the first country in the world to do so. Parliamentarians voted on the constitutional amendment at the Palace of Versailles, passing it with an overwhelming support of 780 in favor and 72 against. The French constitution will now guarantee a woman's freedom to voluntarily terminate a pregnancy. France's decision to make abortion a constitutional right is in stark contrast to the situation in the United States and an ongoing movement there to roll back abortion rights. In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court abolished the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, which allowed abortions at up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, effectively banning abortion in the country. While several other countries around the world have included reproductive rights in their constitutions, France is the first to explicitly state that an abortion will be guaranteed as a right. Polls showed around 85% of the public supported amending the constitution to protect the right to an abortion in a country where abortion has been legal since 1975. Following the vote in Parliament, President Emmanuel Macron said the decision was a source of pride for France and a message to the world. He also announced that he would celebrate International Women's Day on the 8th by publicly recognizing the National Day of the Constitution. The decision was met with cheers from abortion rights supporters, while the Eiffel Tower was lit up, displaying a message translating as "My body, my choice." Right before the vote, the Vatican expressed its opposition in a statement, saying there is no right to take a life. Watchers believe the latest decision by France could pave the way for other countries to guarantee the right to abortion in their constitutions. 이승재, Arirang News.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Colorado's efforts to keep former President Donald Trump from state's presidential primary ballots. This came a day before Super Tuesday. Yoon explains.
A day before Super Tuesday, when the largest number of states will be holding presidential primaries or caucuses, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously restored Donald Trump to the 2024 presidential primary ballots. The state of Colorado had barred Trump from its Republican primary, arguing he incited the 2021 January 6th Capitol riot. While there was sharp disagreement among the Supreme Court justices on the relevance of a post-Civil War provision to prevent former office holders who engaged in insurrection from holding office again, all 9 justices unanimously agreed that Trump remain on the ballot on the basis that the 14th Amendment did not allow individual states to bar the former president from running for president, and that only Congress had that power.
They were unanimous in their ruling, and they said that Colorado's unable to disqualify Trump. Interestingly, they said nothing about the logic of Colorado Supreme Court. They said nothing about the underlying finding that Donald Trump did engage in insurrection, and instead they said procedurally, a state can't make that determination, but this is something that Congress has to step up and do.
Trump's case was the first at the Supreme Court dealing with a provision of the 14th Amendment. And while Monday's unanimous ruling is specific to Colorado, it also overrides state-level decisions to remove Trump from the GOP primary ballot in Maine and Illinois, where his inclusion had also been on hold. This was also the High Court's most direct involvement in a presidential election since the case of Bush versus Gore in 2000 regarding a vote recount in the presidential election. With Monday's ruling, the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Donald Trump to remain on the ballot in all 50 states. 이은진, Arirang News.
Spring rain is falling across many areas of the country. Seoul is expected to have a small amount, but there's a heavy snow advisory issued for the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do Province. Snow has already begun to fall there in high mountainous areas in the south with low temperatures. The area will receive up to 15 centimeters of heavy snow by tomorrow. Most of the rain in inland areas will stop tonight. However, the East Coast will receive up to 30 millimeters of rain by tomorrow and 40 on Jeju Island until the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow, Seoul will start off at 2 degrees Celsius, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju 5 degrees. Daily highs in Seoul will move up to 10, Daejeon, Daegu, Busan, and Jeju 11 degrees Celsius. Some slight rain is forecast in southern inland areas in the late afternoon tomorrow, and rain and snow are expected in Gangwon-do, Chungcheongbuk-do, and Gyeongsangbuk-do provinces on Thursday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI headline news. Good night.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.